This is Yulia Shalamov, and you're listening to UChicago Public Policy Podcasts.
Welcome to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. This is UC3P, our eponymously named podcast on policy, politics, and current affairs. My name is David Raban, and I'm the production manager for what we like to call the main page. Today, we talk with Abdul El-Sayed, a current activist and former gubernatorial candidate for the state of Michigan. Dr. El-Sayed previously practiced as a physician, earned a Rhodes Scholarship, and served as the top official for Detroit's Department of Health. We talked with Dr. El-Sayed about the primary season, his new book, Healing Politics, and how becoming a father has changed his perspective. Before we get into the interview, just a couple notes. First, we spoke with Dr. El-Sayed over Skype, so you might hear a few distortions. Second, a quick reminder that UC3P is a nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse any political candidates, campaigns, or positions. Now, let's get straight into the interview. Without further ado, here's activist and former Michigan gubernatorial candidate, Abdul El-Sayed.
So hello everyone, and welcome to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcast. My name is Jacob Leppek, and today we're joined by physician, Rhodes Scholar, former candidate in the 2018 Michigan gubernatorial race, and current Institute of Politics Fellow, Abdul El-Sayed. Mr. El-Sayed, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, honored to be here. Thank you.
Yes, can you describe and talk about your current role as a fellow with the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics a bit?
Yeah, I was really honored to be selected, and it's a great opportunity to engage with students and folks who are coming to this work of politics from a number of different backgrounds. I'm, as you know, a physician, which is not a common political background, but I chose to host a seminar on well-being and public policy, considering all of the ways that our health is impacted by the policy choices that we make as a society. And through our government. And so it's been a really great space for conversation with folks who are coming to both health and policy and politics from different and diverse perspectives. And I really enjoyed my time at the university.
Yeah, so I've been to a couple of those conversations, and I think most people who have attended have really enjoyed your perspective. I'm curious about, being outside of Michigan. You're in Chicago, and right now you're traveling the United States. Can you talk a bit about the issues that, Michigan is grappling with versus the rest of the nation?
Yeah.
In what ways is Michigan unique, or are these issues common?
I think a lot of these issues are common, but Michigan is very much a canary in the coal mine for a lot of the biggest issues we face. Our economy is disproportionately manufacturing and agriculture, and as go manufacturing and agriculture, as go our economy in the state of Michigan. And so we've got a real responsibility, I think, to be talking about our experiences. When you think about the trade war, the impact that it had was disproportionately on those two sectors. And then, we sit on 21% of the world's fresh water. And so issues of climate change and water access are part and parcel of how we think about our role and our responsibility to the broader country. And unfortunately, right, despite being surrounded by so much fresh water, Michigan is also, uniquely plagued by water-related issues, whether it's water shutoffs in Detroit or the Flint water crisis in Flint, or it's, the Line 5 that moves barrels of fossil fuels through the Straits of Mackinac that connect Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. And if that pipeline were to burst, could potentially put 10% of the world's fresh water at risk. And these are water issues with implications both on how we think about our responsibility to provide people access to water, but also how we think about water stewardship and a responsibility to the broader world. And then lastly, Michigan is a racially diverse and ethnically diverse community, large immigrant community, large Black community that tend to be segregated into a few of Michigan cities. And so, it is an epicenter for thinking about what it will take to build a truly racially equitable and racially just America. And unfortunately, Michigan hasn't been doing a great job of that. And so thinking about how we empower and build out equitably cities like Detroit and Flint, how we address the kind of segregation that has been a consequence of 60, 70 years of American housing and municipal policy. Michigan is a place to be thinking about and fixing those issues. And so I think it's a place where a lot of the country's biggest challenges are actually most manifest, and where we have a real responsibility to be building and empowering.
I'm guessing that a lot of these issues are going to be at the forefront of your upcoming book. So you're currently writing a book called Healing Politics, out March 31st, 2020. And I read on your website that you in the book, you diagnose an underlying epidemic afflicting our country, an epidemic of insecurity. Can you talk about that? And how does that relate to the issues that you just mentioned?
Absolutely. So we all watched in 2016 as an election that we never thought would go on way did. And as we've watched in the 3 years following, I think this epidemic of insecurity has really matured into a new step. And what do I mean by that? Well, why did Donald Trump get elected? You've got a fearmonger who was talking about the fact that institutions of power had locked out huge numbers of Americans from the means of a dignified life, but also was attributing that to, unfortunately, the existence of a multiracial, multi-ethnic America. That you point to black folks and say, well, they're getting all the handouts, and brown folks and saying they're the ones who've come to take your jobs. And unfortunately, right, he was elected. But that challenge that he was speaking to, the fact that people feel locked out of the means of a dignified life, whether it's a job that pays a living wage, or it is access to healthcare, or it's a school that dignifies your kid's brain, all of those challenges, they exist in one of the most unequal moments in American history. And this epidemic of insecurity is about the consequences of watching as access to the means of a dignified life have slipped further and further away for most Americans, and the consequence of how that has led us to this moment where our engagement with our politics and our civic space are really framed by a fear of what we're going to lose, rather than an appreciation for or a belief in what we can build together. And so in diagnosing this epidemic and how it's been created by all of the challenges that we face, whether it's the fact that people can't afford their health care, the fact that our infrastructure is broken, the fact that our kids' schools are underfunded, the fact that our economy has created more and more underemployment, even as it moves money and wealth to the very top, whether it's the fact that people have had their votes suppressed and have been locked out of our politics. All of these have created this miasma for insecurity, and the consequences have been the 2016 election and the subsequent 3 years, where all we've sort of managed to do is polarize even more. And I talk about the responsibility to rethink our politics around this epidemic of insecurity, and around healing the divides that we face by recognizing the system that has created these inequities around corporatism and corporate personhood and financialization, and the way that the firewall between corporations and government has just simply broken down.
So these are massive problems, clearly, and they require solutions. I'm curious about, in light of your endorsement of Senator Sanders, if you could talk to sort of what you think the right course for finding these solutions is. His policies are frequently characterized as radical. I'm curious as to whether you think they actually are radical, as frequently characterized in the last Democratic Party debate, or if these are really natural solutions, or if there's disadvantages to the incremental approach that's frequently given by a lot of the other candidates.
I don't think these ideas are radical. I don't think they're radical at all. I think they are pitched to the tone of the problems that we face, which are gigantic problems. And, if you're thinking incrementally about fixing large, serious, and worsening problems, that's pretty radical to me. It'd be like saying, this patient's having a heart attack, and let's give him an aspirin and let him go, right? That's just not enough. And I would say that that's a radical approach. And so I've endorsed Bernie Sanders because I think he is the unique candidate in this race that is both pitching solutions at the levels of the problems that we face and recognizes the kind of politics that will take to enact those kinds of solutions, which is recognizing that the answers are not going to come from the institutions that we've trusted. They're going to come from the people, and people agitating to get policies passed that are truly to the benefit of everyone. And so, I take issue with this sort of left-right continuum, this idea that anything that is more collective is by definition more radical. I just think that our problems are so radical because our solutions have been so tepid, and it's time that we have solutions that are pitched to the problems that we face.
Can you talk being involved in this primary process about what it's like to be surrounded by and speaking in front of people? What moments do you remember? Are there any stories that you've had on the campaign trail that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, many, and I encourage people to read the book. I talk a lot about the experience of running, but I'll give you just one. You know, I ran a race where a lot of folks didn't expect that I'd have any purchase at all. But one of the things that we did was to go out to communities where the pundits least expected that I would do well and have an honest conversation with folks about what we wanted to do and why we wanted to do it. One community we went to was Montcalm County, Michigan, where actually a lot of my stepmother's family still lives. And we were having a town hall. And this gentleman, after I finished speaking, said, you say you support the Constitution of the United States, but, you are for gun control, which means you don't support the Second Amendment. And I told him, I said, well, what does the Second Amendment say? He said, well, I can't, it says that we have the right to bear arms, but I can't quote it. I said, okay, well, I pulled out my Constitution, which I made a habit of carrying on me wherever I went, and started reading the Second Amendment and told him, look, this Second Amendment is about protecting you from tyranny from the government, which would imply that your right to bear arms ought to be consistent with the government's ability to bear arms as well. But you and I both know that the federal government has nuclear weapons. Do you think you deserve to have nuclear weapons? He said, no. I said, well, it says that the government, we know that the government has tanks. Do you think you deserve to have a tank? He said, no. I said, well, you are establishing the fact that there's a line, right? That you shouldn't have all the weaponry that the government has. And it would be absurd to allow, private citizens to carry that kind of destructive capacity. So we've established that there ought to be some line. The question is where that line is. And for me, the line gets drawn at these semi-automatic weapons of war that are designed to kill many people quickly. And afterwards, he came up to me after the town hall. He said, I'm voting for you. I said, what? He said, I'm voting for you. I said, but we just had this somewhat bitter interchange about the Second Amendment. He said, I know. I disagree with you on that. But you were willing to tell me why you disagreed, and you didn't tell me what you thought I wanted to hear. And I agree with you on 9 out of 10 things. And so if I know that you're going to fight on this one, then you're going to fight just as hard on the other 9. And that's why I'm voting for you. And to me, it was a real lesson in, just showing up as your authentic self, talking about what you believe in and why, no matter where you go, and the power that has in a democratic society.
That's a fantastic example to hear. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back.
Hey, UC3P listeners. I'm Thomas.
And I'm Nick.
In the United States, public faith in the military remains sky high, while trust in other government institutions sinks to an all-time low.
At the same time, fewer than 1% of Americans will ever serve in the armed forces, and the cultural divide between active duty troops and the civilian population continues to widen.
UC3P presents a new series, Thank You for Your Service, where we take a deep dive into the complex world of civil military affairs.
We'll address the politicization of the military, defense policy in the news, and the importance of staying informed in a democracy.
Join us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts as we explore how our professional military institution relates to the society it serves.
Yeah, so I think that's a fantastic example and a really great moment. I'm curious, so you're steadfast in your political beliefs. I'm curious, what would make you change your mind about a policy?
Well, look, I'm a scientist by training, and if somebody's able to show me that there's a disconnect between the values and ends that I'd like to achieve in the world and the methods by which to do it, right, and can show me that there's solid empirical evidence about why I'm wrong, I'll change my opinion. That's the thing. Policy is a means, it's not an end. And we've got to be really good at being able to identify the ends and differentiate them from the means, and know when, the means that we had thought we were after weren't achieving the ends that we know we're after.
That example actually raises another question in my mind, too. You're such an eloquent speaker. You're frequently up in front of crowds and seeing the Democratic Party candidates speak all the time. What do you think is the most effective mode for politicians to speak to individuals? I mean, you have such a different mode of communication than so many of the other candidates and individuals who run. So why do you communicate in the way that you communicate? Does that make sense as a question? Hopefully?
Yeah. I learned how to speak doing 2 things. One was my father used to give Friday sermons at various mosques, and so I'd pinch hit for him when he needed somebody to to come and preach.